Marcus gave her a serious look. My file. The documentation of every time I faced something similar, and what I did about it. Amara straightened in her chair. Her father rarely spoke about the challenges he faced in his career. This isn't just about one encounter, he continued. It's about learning to navigate a world that sometimes decides who you are before you open your mouth. Amara nodded, feeling a new resolve building inside her. The chili bowl sat empty on the coffee table as Marcus retrieved a thick manila folder from his home office. When he returned to the living room, Amara noticed how carefully he handled it, like it contained something precious rather than painful. I started this during my second year in the Army, he explained, sitting beside her on the sofa. My commanding officer suggested it after an incident on base. He opened the folder, revealing meticulously organized papers divided by colored tabs. Some pages were yellowed with age, others were crisp and recent. What happened? Amara asked. Scanning the first page, a handwritten account dated nearly 25 years earlier. Marcus leaned back, his eyes focused on some distant point. I was accused of stealing equipment from the training facility. 2 white officers who outranked me conducted what they called a random inspection of my quarters. No one else was randomly selected that day. Amara frowned. Did they find anything? Of course not. But my CO, Captain Reynolds, witnessed part of it. After they left, he told me something I never forgot. Marcus shifted to face his daughter, directly. He said, Johnson, in this world, you'll face 2 battles, the mission and the fight to be seen fairly while carrying it out. Document everything. He flipped through the folder, showing Amara different entries. Some described blatant discrimination, others subtle slights. But what caught her attention was how each entry ended with the same structure. What happened, how he responded, and what he learned. You never told me about any of this, Amara said quietly. I didn't want you to see the world as an unfriendly place before you had to, Marcus admitted. Maybe that was wrong of me. No, I get it. Amara touched one of the pages. So what did Captain Reynolds mean about documenting everything? Marcus pulled out a more recent entry. Look at this one from 2 years ago. I was up for my last promotion. Another officer with less experience and fewer commendations was being pushed ahead of me. I had this file showing my consistent performance, plus all the times I'd faced unfair treatment and handled it professionally. Did it help? I showed it to General Martinez. 2 weeks later, I got the promotion. He closed the folder. The documentation wasn't just for others, though. It was for me, to recognize patterns, to avoid internalizing other people's prejudice, and to choose my battles wisely. Amara thought about the officers who had stopped her. So I should start my own file? If you want. But there's something even more important I learned. Marcus leaned forward. It's about perspective. What do you mean? Those officers today, they have a perspective. It's limited and flawed, but understanding it can give you power. He gestured to the folder. Early in my career, I just saw these incidents as attacks. Later, I began to see them as information. Amara looked confused. Information about what? About systems, about people's assumptions, about how much work we still have to do. He smiled slightly. And about who my allies were. Not everyone who looked like those officers thought like them. Captain Reynolds was white. General Martinez is Hispanic. Some of my strongest advocates didn't share my background but shared my values. Marcus put his hand on Amara's shoulder. The hardest lesson I've learned is that responding with anger, even when that anger is justified, rarely changes minds. Strategic engagement does. That sounds exhausting, Amara said honestly. It can be, Marcus acknowledged. That's why you need to know when to fight and when to walk away. Not every battle deserves your energy. How do you know the difference? Experience, mentorship, and sometimes you just have to trust your gut. He closed the folder. But tomorrow, We're going to do something about what happened today. What? Amara asked, sitting up straighter. We're going to have a conversation with the police department about training and community relations. Marcus's expression was determined. And you're going to lead it. The next morning, Amara woke earlier than usual. Sleep had come fitfully, her mind replaying both the incident with the officers and her father's words about strategic engagement. She sat at her desk with a blank notebook, trying to gather her thoughts before school. She wrote down everything she remembered about the encounter: the officers' appearances, the cruiser number, the exact location, and the time. Just as she finished, her father knocked on her bedroom door. "Ready for school?" Marcus asked, already, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. Today was one of his rare days off from the base. "Almost," Amara replied, closing her notebook. "But Dad, I've been thinking, is going to the police station really the best first step? Won't they just defend those officers?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe. But that's not our only." "Stop today." After breakfast, instead of driving Amara directly to school, Marcus took a detour to City Hall. The imposing brick building was quiet this early in the morning. They walked to the third floor, where a sign read, "Community Relations Office." Inside, they found a middle-aged woman arranging files behind a desk. She looked up as they entered. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I hope so," Marcus replied. "We're here to see Diane Mitchell." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's me. And you are?" "Colonel Marcus Johnson. This is my daughter, Amara. We'd like to file a community concern report." Diane gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "Please, sit down. What kind of concern?" Marcus nodded to Amara, who took a deep breath before speaking. "Yesterday, I was walking home from school through the Oak Ridge neighborhood when 2 police officers stopped me," she began, opening her notebook. "They questioned me as if I was trespassing, even though I walked that route regularly." As Amara recounted the details, Diane took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Amara finished, Diane turned to a computer and pulled up a form. "We take these reports seriously," she explained. "The Community Relations Office acts as a bridge between citizens and city services, including law enforcement. I'd like to enter this officially, if that's all right with you." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what we want." For the next 20 minutes, they worked together to complete the form. When they finished, Diane printed 2 copies, one for their records and one for hers. "What happens now?" Amara asked. "Several things," Diane said. "First, this report goes to both the police commissioner and the civilian oversight board. Second, I'll arrange a meeting with the precinct captain responsible for that area. And third," she looked directly at Amara, "I'd like to invite you to join our Youth Advisory Council." "What's that?" Amara asked. "A group of students from across the city who meet monthly with leaders from various departments, including police, to discuss issues affecting young people." Diane handed her a brochure. "Your perspective would be valuable." Amara glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that," she said, accepting the brochure. As they left City Hall, Amara felt a new sense of purpose. "So we're not going to the police station?" "Not yet," Marcus replied. "We've established an official record first. Now, the next step is this." He handed her a business card from his wallet. The card read, "Community Journalism Project," with an address downtown. "What's this?" Amara asked. "Someone who can help us?" "Make sure your experience doesn't get buried in paperwork. Teresa Rodriguez runs an independent news platform focused on community issues. She's tough but fair." Amara studied the card. "Journalism? But I don't want to become some news story." "Not specifically," Marcus explained as they walked to the car. "But the pattern your experience represents? Teresa reports on systemic issues, not just incidents." Amara considered this. "Will it make a difference?" "It already has," Marcus said, starting the engine. "You've taken the first step from being someone things happen to someone who makes things happen. As they drove toward the Community Journalism Project office, Amara realized she no longer felt like a victim. She felt like an advocate. The Youth Advisory Council meeting was held in a bright community room at the local library. Walking in, Amara felt her stomach tighten with nerves. 8 teenagers sat in a circle of chairs, along with 3 adults who appeared to be facilitators. One of the adults, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes, spotted Amara and approached with an outstretched hand. "You must be Amara Johnson," she said warmly. "I'm Patricia Winters, the council coordinator. Diane Mitchell told me you might be joining us today." Amara shook her hand. "Thank you for having me. We're glad you're here. Let me introduce you to everyone." The group was diverse, students from different schools, neighborhoods, and backgrounds. There was Jamal from Westridge High, who led his school's restorative justice program, Sophie, who worked on environmental initiatives, Marcus, no relation to her father, who focused on mental health awareness, and 5 others with various interests. They all greeted her with friendly nods and curious glances. What surprised Amara most, however, was the presence of a police officer in uniform sitting among the teens. He wasn't much older than 30, with an open face and attentive posture. Patricia noticed Amara's gaze. "That's Officer Luis Morales, our department liaison. He attends all our meetings to hear youth perspectives directly and bring those insights back to his colleagues." After introductions, Patricia explained the day's agenda. "Today, we're discussing the Community Safety Walk program. Officer Morales has a proposal, and we'd like your feedback." Officer Morales stood up and explained the concept. Regular walks where officers and local teens would pair up to identify safety concerns in different neighborhoods, from broken streetlights to unsafe intersections. "The goal is twofold," he explained, "to improve physical safety in our communities and to build better relationships between young people and law enforcement." Jamal raised his hand. "How do we know this isn't just for show? What happens with our feedback?" "Fair question," Officer Morales acknowledged. "That's why we'll have community follow-up meetings where the department reports back on actions taken based on your recommendations." The discussion continued, with teens asking pointed questions and offering suggestions. Amara listened carefully, impressed by the respectful but direct exchanges. When Patricia asked if any newcomers had thoughts to share, Amara surprised herself by raising her hand. "I think this program has potential," she began cautiously, "but there's an issue that might need addressing first." She took a deep breath. "What happens when teens don't feel safe around the very officers who are supposed to make neighborhoods safer?" The room grew quiet. Officer Morales turned to face her directly. "Can you elaborate?" Drawing on her father's advice about strategic engagement, Amara shared her experience in Oak Ridge, not as an accusation but as a problem to solve together. She described the feeling of being treated as suspicious simply for walking through a neighborhood. "If we're going to do community walks together, we need to address why some young people, especially those of color, might be hesitant to participate," she concluded. Instead of becoming defensive, Officer Morales nodded thoughtfully. "You've highlighted exactly why this program is needed, but also why it might fail without additional training." He looked around the room. "Would the council be willing to help develop that training component?" The suggestion sparked animated discussion. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, they had formed a special committee to design training materials addressing bias awareness for officers participating in the program. Amara, along with Jamal and Sophie, volunteered to lead it. As the meeting concluded, Officer Morales approached Amara. "Thank you for your honesty today. It's perspectives like yours that can actually change how we operate." Walking home afterward, Amara called her father to update him. "So you'll be teaching the police now?" Marcus asked, pride evident in his voice. "Not teaching, exactly," Amara replied. "Building bridges. It's a start." It was a small step, but for the first time since the incident, Amara felt hopeful. 3 weeks into her work with the Youth Advisory Council, Amara found herself standing before a small audience in the community center. The training program she had helped develop was ready for its first presentation, and Patricia had asked her to introduce it. As she arranged her note cards on the podium, she scanned the room. Officer Morales sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly. Beside him were 5 other officers who had volunteered for the Community Walks program. Behind them sat members of the council, along with a handful of parents and community members. Her father had taken a rare morning off to attend, sitting quietly in the back row. "Good morning," Amara began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Thank you for coming today. The Youth Police Partnership Initiative represents a collaborative effort to build trust between law enforcement and young people in our community. As she outlined the program's goals and structure, Amara noticed a middle-aged man in a police uniform enter the room. Unlike the other officers, his expression was tight with skepticism. He leaned against the back wall, arms crossed. Amara continued, explaining how the training would address cultural awareness, communication strategies, and bias recognition. Just as she finished her introduction and prepared to hand over to Jamal for the next section, the officer at the back raised his hand. "Yes?" Amara acknowledged him hesitantly. "I'm Sergeant Miller, supervising officer for Oak Ridge District," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "I have to ask, who exactly are you to be training police officers? Do you have any law enforcement experience?" A tense silence fell over the room. Amara felt her heart racing, but remembered her father's advice about strategic engagement. "You're right that I don't have law enforcement experience, Sergeant Miller," she replied. "None of us on the Youth Council do. Our expertise is different. We know what it feels like to be young people interacting with police in our communities. This isn't about teaching you how to do your job. It's about sharing perspectives that might help you do it more effectively." Sergeant Miller's frown deepened. "Perspectives? Let me share a perspective. My officers patrol neighborhoods dealing with real safety concerns. When they question someone who doesn't belong in an area, they're doing their job." Amara recognized him suddenly. He had been in the passenger seat of the cruiser that day in Oak Ridge. "With respect, sir," she said, keeping her voice level, "determining who belongs in a neighborhood based on appearance is exactly the kind of assumption this program hopes to address." Officer Morales stood up. "Sergeant, this program has department approval. These young people aren't criticizing us. They're helping us build better community relations." "Some of us don't need teenagers telling us how to do our jobs," Sergeant Miller replied. From the back of the room, Marcus Johnson rose to his feet. The room grew quiet as he walked forward. He did not wear his military uniform, but something in his bearing commanded attention. "Sergeant Miller," he said calmly, "I'm Colonel Marcus Johnson, Amara's father. Before you dismiss what these young people have created, I suggest you consider its value. In my experience leading elite military units, the best intelligence often comes from sources closest to the ground." Sergeant Miller straightened slightly at the mention of Marcus's rank. "This isn't about questioning authority," Marcus continued. "It's about making authority more effective through understanding." The tension in the room remained, but Sergeant Miller nodded stiffly and took a seat. As Amara handed the presentation over to Jamal, she caught a glimpse of Teresa Rodriguez from the Community Journalism Project, slipping into the back row with her notebook open. The confrontation had not gone unnoticed. Later, when the presentation ended, Patricia approached Amara. "You handled that beautifully," she said quietly. "But Sergeant Miller's reaction tells us something important." "What's that?" Amara asked. "That this work is necessary and that it won't be easy." Amara nodded, watching as Sergeant Miller left without speaking to anyone. Change, she was learning, rarely came without resistance. The headline in the Community Chronicle caught Amara by surprise. "Youth-led initiative changes police training protocols." Teresa Rodriguez's article highlighted the confrontation with Sergeant Miller, but focused primarily on the successful implementation of the training program. 2 months later, There was even a photo of Amara and Officer Morales leading a community walk through Oak Ridge. Amara folded the newspaper and placed it in her growing file, her own version of her father's documentation system. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of activity, challenges, and unexpected victories. She checked her watch and hurried downstairs. Today was an important meeting at the police headquarters, and she didn't want to be late. Her father was already waiting. By the door. "Nervous?" Marcus asked as they drove downtown. "A little," Amara admitted. "I never expected Chief Williams would actually implement our recommendations department-wide." The police headquarters looked intimidating with its concrete facade and formal entrance. Inside, however, the atmosphere was surprisingly welcoming. Officer Morales greeted them in the lobby and escorted them to a conference room where several people were already gathered. Police Chief Williams, a stern-faced woman with 3 decades of service, sat at the head of the table. Beside her was Diane Mitchell from the Community Relations Office, Patricia from the Youth Council, and surprisingly, Sergeant Miller. Amara noticed he looked less confrontational than before. "Miss Johnson, Colonel?" Chief Williams nodded to them. "Thank you for coming. We're here to discuss the preliminary results of the training program you helped develop." Officer Morales distributed folders containing data from the first quarter of implementation. "As you can see," he explained, "we tracked several metrics, before and after the training. Civilian complaints in participating districts have decreased by 17.7%. Officer satisfaction ratings have improved, and community engagement metrics are up across all demographics. Most notably," Chief Williams added, "in the Oak Ridge Westfield corridor, where we've seen a 24% increase in positive community interactions." Amara glanced at Sergeant Miller, who was studying the report with a furrowed brow. "Sergeant Miller," the chief continued, "would you share your observations? Your district has shown the most significant improvement." Miller cleared his throat. "The numbers speak for themselves," he began cautiously. "When we implemented the youth advisory feedback into our patrol briefings, officers initially pushed back. The results are hard to argue with, especially the mentorship program with Westfield. Hi. The mentorship program had been Amara's idea, pairing officers with students for regular check-ins and casual conversations outside the context of enforcement. To her surprise, 15 officers had volunteered, including eventually Sergeant Miller himself. "We're now looking to expand this model to all precincts," Chief Williams announced. "And we'd like the Youth Advisory Council to help train our officers as we roll it out." As the meeting continued, they discussed next steps and new initiatives. Patricia mentioned that 3 other cities had requested information about replicating the program. Diane shared feedback from community members who reported feeling safer and more respected during police interactions. When the meeting ended, Sergeant Miller approached Amara as others filed out of the room. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "I owe you an apology." Amara looked up at him, surprised. "I was wrong to dismiss your perspective," he continued. "After 20 years on the force, I thought I knew everything about policing our communities. This program has taught me otherwise." "Thank you, Sergeant," Amara replied. "That means a lot." "I'm mentoring 3 students from Westfield now," he added, "including a young man who reminds me of myself at that age. It's changing how I see things." As they left the building, Amara felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the newspaper headline or the impressive statistics. Real change was happening, not just in policies or procedures, but in people's hearts and minds. "You know what your Captain Reynolds would say about all this?" she asked her father as they walked to the car. Marcus smiled. "What's that?" "Mission accomplished. But the work continues." 1 year after the encounter in Oak Ridge, Amara stood at the podium in City Hall's main chamber. The room was filled to capacity. Community members, police officers, students, and city officials had gathered for the first annual Community Police Partnership Summit. Camera flashes punctuated the crowd as reporters documented the event. As the keynote speaker, Amara felt a flutter of nervousness, but it quickly gave way to confidence. She was no longer the shaken 16-year-old who had been stopped while walking home. Today, at 17, she spoke with the assurance of someone who had helped create meaningful change. "A year ago," she began, "I walked through the Oak Ridge neighborhood and was made to feel like I didn't belong there. Today, I walked that same route with Officer Carmen Rodriguez on our weekly community safety patrol." She gestured to a uniformed officer in the front row who smiled back warmly. "What changed?" Amara continued. "Not just policies or training manuals. What changed were relationships and understanding. When we started this journey, many people saw it as an us versus them situation. Young people against police, community against authority. But we discovered a different path forward." From her seat beside Chief Williams, Diane Mitchell nodded encouragingly. In the back row, Teresa Rodriguez was taking notes for what would surely be another front-page story. And in the second row, Colonel Marcus Johnson watched his daughter with quiet pride. "Our youth police mentorship program now includes 50 officers and 75 students across the district," Amara explained. "The Community Walks program has expanded to every neighborhood. Civilian complaints have decreased by 32% citywide, while positive interactions have more than doubled." She paused, looking at Sergeant Miller, who sat with several of his officers. "And most importantly, officers report greater job satisfaction and connection to the communities they serve." Amara shared stories from the past year, how a young officer had helped a teen apply for college, how community members had organized a surprise appreciation lunch for their local precinct, how students now felt comfortable approaching officers with concerns rather than avoiding them. None of this happened by accident, she emphasized. It happened because people on all sides were willing to listen, to be uncomfortable sometimes, and to work together towards solutions rather than blame. After her speech, as people mingled during the reception, Amara found herself approached by a man she didn't recognize. "Miss Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mayor Harrison. I've been following your work this past year with great interest." "Thank you, sir," Amara replied, shaking his hand. "I'd like to offer you a position on our newly formed City Youth Commission," he continued. "It's a paid role advising city departments on policies affecting young people. Given what you've accomplished here, you'd be an ideal candidate." Amara was momentarily speechless. As she collected her thoughts, her father appeared at her side. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity," Marcus said, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "It is," Mayor Harrison agreed, "and potentially a stepping stone to bigger things. You have quite a future ahead of you, Miss Johnson." The autumn sun had already begun its descent when Amara Johnson stepped out of her high school's main entrance. At 16, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her debate team folder tucked under one arm and her backpack slung over her shoulder. Today had been particularly successful. She'd led her team to victory with her closing argument on criminal justice reform. Amara decided to take the shortcut through Oak Ridge, an affluent neighborhood that bordered her own. This route would save her 15 minutes, and she wanted to share the good news with her father before he left for his evening workout. The maple trees lining Oak Ridge Avenue had turned brilliant shades of orange and red. Amara walked at a steady pace, mentally rehearsing how she would tell her dad about the debate win. Colonel Marcus Johnson always appreciated thorough debriefs, a habit from his military career that had rubbed off on his daughter. She was so deep in thought that she barely noticed the police cruiser slowing beside her until it matched her pace. The window rolled down. "Excuse me, miss," called the officer in the passenger seat. "Can we have a word?" Amara stopped walking and turned toward the vehicle. "Yes, sir." Two officers exited the cruiser. The taller one approached, while his partner hung back near the vehicle. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood. Mind telling us what you're doing?" "Here? I'm just walking home from school," Amara replied, gesturing to her backpack. "I live in Westfield, just past these few blocks." The officer looked her up and down. "ID?" "I'm 16. I have my school ID," Amara said, reaching for her wallet. "This is a private community. the second officer added, stepping closer. The residents here get concerned when they see unfamiliar people wandering around. Amara felt a knot forming in her stomach. I'm not wandering. I'm walking straight home. I take this route almost every day. Almost every day, huh? The first officer's tone sharpened. So you're regularly in this neighborhood where you don't live. A couple walking their dogs slowed to watch the interaction. Amara felt her cheeks growing hot with embarrassment. Can I see that ID now? The officer pressed. Amara handed over her school identification. The officer studied it longer than necessary. Westfield High, that's on the other side of town. Kind of far from here, isn't it? It's the district school, Amara explained, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm in the debate program there. The officers exchanged glances. Wait here, the first one said, walking back to the cruiser with her ID. For 5 long minutes, Amara stood on the sidewalk while the officers ran some kind of check. Neighbors peeked through windows. A car slowed as it passed. Amara fixed her gaze on her shoes, wishing she could disappear. Finally, the officer returned with her ID. You can go, but maybe find another road home. Residents here get uncomfortable with strangers passing through. I'm not a stranger, Amara said quietly. I walk this way all the time. That's the problem, the second officer muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. They watched as she continued walking, the cruiser crawling behind her until she reached the boundary of Oak Ridge. Only then did they drive away. When Amara finally turned onto her own street, her hands were shaking. The debate victory felt distant now, overshadowed by the humiliation of being treated like an intruder just blocks from her own home. She clutched, her folder tighter, quickening her pace. She needed to talk to her father. Amara paused at her front door. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself before going inside. The encounter with the police had left her feeling small and angry at the same time. She didn't want her father to see her upset, but she knew he would notice something was wrong. Colonel Marcus Johnson missed very little. The moment Amara stepped into the house, the familiar smell of her father's famous chili welcomed her. Music played softly from the kitchen. Jazz, her father's favorite for cooking. On any other day, this would have instantly lifted her spirits. That you, kiddo? Her father called out. How'd the debate go? Amara dropped her backpack by the stairs. We won, she replied, her voice flatter than she intended. She walked into the kitchen, where her father stood stirring a large pot. At 45, Colonel Johnson still maintained the strong, disciplined physique of the elite soldier he was. Few who met him in civilian clothes would guess he commanded one of the military's most specialized units. Today, he wore a simple apron over his t-shirt and jeans, looking more like a regular dad than someone who had led dangerous missions around the world. Marcus turned, smiling proudly. Congratulations. I knew you'd... His smile faded as he caught sight of her face. What happened? Amara shrugged, opening the refrigerator to grab a bottle of water. Nothing important. Marcus set down his wooden spoon and lowered the heat under the pot. Amara Johnson, I've known you your entire life. That face doesn't mean nothing important. She took a long drink of water, avoiding his eyes. Just some cops who thought I didn't belong in Oak Ridge. Her father's expression shifted, a slight tightening around the eyes that most people wouldn't notice. Sit down, he said gently. Tell me everything. Once they were seated at the kitchen island, Amara recounted the encounter. As she spoke, she found herself remembering more details. The way the officers had positioned themselves like she might run, how one had kept his hand near his belt, the whispers from watching neighbors. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face a careful mask. When she finished, he asked, Do you remember their names or badge numbers? Amara shook her head. I was too nervous to look. That's understandable, he said. How are you feeling now? The question broke something loose in Amara, I'm angry. I've walked that way forever. Mrs. Peterson from number 47 even waves to me most days. But these cops acted like I was there to rob someone. Just because... She stopped. Because you're black. Her father finished quietly. Yes, Amara's voice trembled. And the worst part is, I started doubting myself. Like, maybe I shouldn't walk. There. Maybe I am doing something wrong just by existing in that space. Marcus reached across the counter and took her hand. That's exactly what makes these encounters so harmful. They make you question your right to move freely in your own community. What do I do next time? She asked. You stay calm, you know your rights, and you remember that you've done nothing wrong. He squeezed her hand. But I think we need to talk about something bigger here. Amara looked up. What? How to channel this feeling into something productive. He stood, returning to stir the chili. After dinner, I'm going to show you something I've never shown you before. What is it? She asked. Later that evening, as Amara and her father walked home together, they took the route through Oak Ridge, the same path where everything had started. The autumn leaves were turning again, completing the cycle of seasons. So, Marcus said, the Youth Commission. That's quite an honor. Amara nodded. It's strange to think about how much has changed because of one bad day. Not just because of one bad day, Marcus corrected her, because of how you responded to it. They passed the exact spot where the police cruiser had stopped her a year ago. Now, Amara noticed a new community bulletin board there, displaying announcements about neighborhood events, including the schedule for community police walks. You know what I realized today? Amara said. That incident wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. As they turned onto their street, the setting sun cast long shadows ahead of them. Amara walked confidently forward, stepping into a future she was helping to create. One where understanding bridged the gaps between authority and community, between fear and trust, between what was and what could be.